terms of questions to consider, what's new or in the pipeline from your perspective? How do we coordinate and develop a unique value proposition for Penrith to create long-term growth in tourism and visitor economy? What's the right structure for the effective industry group I just spoke about? What funding sources exist to support an industry partnership? Blue Mountain's just got millions of dollars, but that was more in the fire relief zone. What does the tourism roadmap to recovery look like for the industry? And who's driving that recovery, and how can local businesses find out more and benefit from what's on offer there? And I guess we'll go straight to you, Stuart, if that's okay. And my first question, and then we'll let you go, is it October the 11th? Is it the 18th? Or is it December the 1st that we're back on track to welcome people into Penrith and to say, come and visit?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I'll answer your question and then just offer some what you might describe as introductory remarks to help set the scene, and I think I'll give you all a little bit of homework to go and do too. But the New South Wales government has announced its roadmap out of the restriction environment that is governed by the public health orders. What we all call lockdown in a legal term is a stay-at-home order. It's the arrangement that is the foundation of the public health order that restricts people from leaving their home unless they're undertaking it for primary reasons. So on the 11th of October, that stay-at-home order will be lifted, so people will no longer be required to stay at home unless they're undertaking one of those 4 reasons. They'll be free to move around Greater Sydney. But that represents when New South Wales will be at 70% fully vaccinated. When we reach 80% fully vaccinated, now we're currently forecasting that could be about a week later. So the 18th is a possibility here, although we still need to maintain vaccination rates to be able to achieve that. There are a further loosening of restrictions. The primary change that exists in that step from 70 to 80, I should say, is the ability for people to move from from Sydney into regional New South Wales and vice versa. And probably the other one, particularly for hospitality operators, is that at 80% vertical consumption or standing and drinking, if you use normal language, kicks back in at 80%. That has quite a profound impact on the way hospitality activities take place. And then on the 1st of December, we are moving to a position where most of the restrictions that are in place will be removed. There'll be some density provisions that are still in place for higher risk venues. A good example of this is nightclubs, where a density provision will still be in place. Now, I think we'll continually evaluate the settings all the way out to the 1st of December. But Richard, to answer your question, it's a staged stepping out of those public health order arrangements that reflect the increased vaccination rate of the community. And I think it's also important here to remind everyone that the purpose of the public health orders was always to protect the integrity of the health system. So as more people are vaccinated, that means less people are likely to get the virus. And when they do get the virus, because most of us will get it whether we're vaccinated or not, their demand on the health system is greatly minimised. So the reason why we're removing public health orders and restrictions now is because we believe that we're in a position where we can manage the spread of the virus without overwhelming the health system. So that's the primary purpose of the public health orders. It's not to ensure people don't get coronavirus, because coronavirus will move through the community whether you're vaccinated or not. Your vaccination does minimise your ability to contract the virus. There's no doubt about that. It's a scientific fact. It substantially minimises your ability to pass it on to other people. So that's why a phrase you may have heard, the R effective, or the reproductive rate is lower when more people are vaccinated. But primarily what it does is it stops you from getting really sick, which means you are less likely to present to hospital, and less people presenting to hospital means the health system is less likely to be overwhelmed. So that's the pathway out. The Premier is at pains to say that the 11th of October isn't Freedom Day, even though I think that's how a lot of the public view it. When they've been subject to a stay-at-home order for 18 weeks and the stay-at-home order is not in place, it's always going to feel a bit like Freedom Day. But I think the true way of thinking about this is it's incremental releasing of those restrictions to reflect the increasing vaccination rate. And probably the truer Freedom Day is the 1st of December day, where we're operating in a largely unrestricted environment. The government's been really keen to map that pathway out so businesses can adjust to it, that they can see where each of those stages are. It allows particularly tourism operators to re-engage in taking bookings. They can be more confident with the public about bookings. Ideally, I would like to see us settle on a date rather than an 80% figure, so people actually know when they'll be able to take a booking under the 80% conditions. We've been able to achieve that with the 70%. So the sooner we can settle on a date for 80%, that will make life much easier for businesses. So that's kind of the quick sort of précis around the reopening framework. Just on the more general observation and the kind of reason for this call, I think that Penrith is particularly well placed here with some really great bookends to talk about the tourism and visitor economy. At the kind of first bookend is this end of the severe impacts of coronavirus on the economy and the reopening. And then the other bookend is the first flight at the airport in 2026. Now, in my sort of strategic mind, and if I was preparing a paper for a board here, I'd be laying out the 5-year plan and convincing everyone about why we would allocate. Here's our 5-year plan. This is where we are today. We've come out of a rather traumatic period of time, but there's a real sense of optimism and renewal that exists now. We need to capture and harness that. And then within 5 years, there's this quite substantial piece of infrastructure that's going to open up our region to a much larger market. So that's a really logical place to try and develop a 5-year strategy for the visitor economy in Penrith specifically, but also how Penrith sits in its wider community of Western Sydney and Greater Sydney and New South Wales. So I think there's some really neat bookends for us to think through that lens. So it's, in my head, it's from recovery to liftoff. And I think you work through those things. And so if you start to break that down, it's in the first 6 months to 12 months, it's what do we need to do to get businesses back on their feet, get them back open again? How can we accelerate the recovery of revenue back into those businesses? I think the state government has made it pretty clear that we will support demand-driving activities in the visitor economy. The Treasurer has made it clear that in the not-too-distant future, he'll be announcing a substantial recovery package that really is focused on demand-driving activities. So I think marketing campaigns, events, probably reduced taxation. Other areas that local governments can leverage off the back of that is in their regulatory settings. A great example of this is things like al fresco dining. So where there are prohibitive restrictions around outdoor dining, we know that outdoor settings are going to be probably more sought after. They're definitely seen as safer by both health and I think by the public. So what are the things we can do to allow us to activate outdoor settings, use footpaths, streetscapes to allow what I might describe as spillover economic activity out of existing venues out into the footpath? That does make local government and councillors a bit nervous because it requires them to think a bit laterally. But hey, we've just come out of a once in 100-year pandemic. If you're not prepared to think laterally now, then you're probably never going to think laterally ever in your entire life. So I think we've got to look at those types of concepts. The middle phase, I think, is the kind of building phase. And this is where you can think through the lens of infrastructure investments. And there's a really great opportunity here to leverage the new West Invest Fund that the government has announced, $5 billion for Western Sydney, with a really strong focus around open public spaces, parks, CBDs and town centres. where this type of activity can take place. So how can you embellish existing infrastructure or deliver new infrastructure that creates better economic activity? And I think as an extension of that, there's also the work the 24-hour economy commissioner is doing in New South Wales, which Penrith I think could leverage very effectively. And I think Mike Rodriguez, who's not your typical public servant bureaucrat, I recruited him out of Time Out Australia. He wears purple jackets. He doesn't wear a suit. He's worked in the night economy. He's an exceptional operator. He's a lawyer by trade, so he understands the legal framework. But I think that allows us to extend our economic activity into the evening. And he's all about diversifying nighttime offerings. So it's not just about alcohol or not just about alcohol, but not just about alcohol and entertainment. There are different forms of economic activity that you can undertake over a longer period of time. And then the third phase is really about preparing to engage internationally. You've got an airport that's going to literally drop people 15 minutes down the road. How do you start preparing Penrith to be able to capture the economic activity that comes from that amazing opportunity to be internationally connected? High Street Penrith is almost exactly the same distance as what Martin Place is from Kingsford Smith Airport to Western Sydney Airport. So when you're thinking about economic corridors and the benefit of an airport, Penrith is the closest CBD centre to this new international airport. It's got to be part of our thinking. And so I think that then opens up the kind of discussion and question about how do you leverage existing assets to make full benefit of what comes with the airport. And that's where things like, what Penrith Lakes Development Corporation is thinking about on their site, the way we've really activated the river precinct, and infrastructure has been a big driver in that. I got criticised a lot by many people, not everyone, about building a pedestrian bridge over the river. Now it's one of the highest foot traffic locations. Off the back of that bridge, East Bank opened up. The log cabin investment has come in. The investment into Emu Hall has taken place. The state government and the council are going to redo the police cottage. There's $29 million going into Regatta Park. There's $10 million going into Tench Reserve. Like literally off the back of that one investment, we've now catalysed almost $100 million or over $100 million of additional investment in the river precinct. That's just an extraordinary return on investment just by making a site more accessible. So what are the things that we can do right around Penrith where small to medium investments can really leverage greater economic activity? And then are there some bigger things? Like, are there just bigger projects that we know will drive economic activity? I think an area where we have great opportunity, but we're a little bit weak, is on the business and trade show activities. So business, travel and trade activity. If you look at occupancy rates, and Phil will probably give you a good example of this, so will other accommodation providers. We're pretty good Thursday to the weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, not too bad. Monday or Sunday night, a little bit less, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is our flat spot. That's the business traveller. So what are the infrastructure decisions we need to make Penrith more attractive for business events, to really load up the front end of the week with the business traveller before the leisure traveller kicks in at the back end of the week? So, Richard, that's my sort of 10-minute synopsis on what a 5-year strategy could look like, broken into 3 pretty clear stages with some pretty obvious bookends. I think if you work around that type of context through the Chamber of Commerce, with the council, with the destination network, you're lining up pretty much like for like with the 2030 strategy that exists for Destination New South Wales. And we've been presented the most amazing opportunity with things like West Invest, the funding that's going to be allocated to COVID recovery. Really, the opportunities in my mind are almost endless for this community because there's such a great foundation from which to build from, which is not necessarily the way you think about life when you're coming out of a horrendous pandemic where businesses have contracted quite severely their revenue base. They've lost employees, etc. But I do think there's a reason to be quite optimistic. Not everyone has what we've got at the moment. Not everyone has the Penrith Lakes looking to come on board, the River Precinct, an international airport, $20 billion of new rail and road infrastructure to make Penrith better connected, access to a $5 billion Western Sydney fund. This is a rare moment in time. If you guys are brave enough to capture it, then you can do some pretty special things.
So thank you so much, Stuart. I mean, that's incredibly rich and so timely. And what about the homework? So that's the 5-year plan you're talking about.
That's exactly right, Richard. I'm not going to do it for you.
That's enough homework.
Okay, did you get that, team? I think that's the message there. And I think that's the takeaway piece, the 3 stages to bring that all to reality. But thank you so much. So what I'm thinking now is we move quickly around and bring our own different perspectives to this. And so perhaps from, I guess, the city obviously is going to play a key role moving forward, as it has done. Jenny, what's your reflection in terms of the role of Penrith, and also in the context of this sort of collaboration and stakeholder group and the 5-year plan? Liz, did you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just conscious that Greg has to go at 10:30, so we've only got 5 minutes left of Greg's time if we want to just park that feedback for a moment.
Yes, good one. Okay, Greg, please.
Yeah, thank you. And look, I do apologise. This was a standing meeting and it just got moved a little bit with Steve Cox. So, look, I think Stuart's covered a hell of a lot of things that I was going to articulate, especially around the enabling infrastructure. You see, when enabling infrastructure, how do you take the best of it? But one of the core parts of listening today and finding out is who's going to do what. It's the roles and responsibilities. You can't do everything. And don't duplicate. And if there's an opportunity to engage across different platforms, is really aligning where you can put your best resources. And, with the team that's sitting around here, you've got some great resources, but you don't want to be doing everything. If Penrith Council is doing the event attraction, or as Stuart talked about there, about the outdoor dining, how do we who's going to be able to talk to Penrith Council about how do we activate this as a recovery process to get that outdoor dining happening. The government's made it easy. They've done it through, they've done it down at the Rocks area. So there's actually things where you can take councils on a tour that doesn't damage anything if there's that scepticism, but who's going to do it? A little bit about, where do you play your role? Where do you see the chamber playing a role? Are you going to be the provider, or are you going to be the knowledge sharer? So if you have the gymnastics coming up into Penrith, are all the businesses ready to actually welcome people in there, or do they not know it's coming? Because the worst thing you can have is if a new consumer comes to your area and they're like, oh, there's no welcoming or there's no customer service in play, you actually don't get them back. And one of the key parts about demand driving is if you can get someone to come once, you want them to get twice, 3 times, rather than having to pick a new person every time. Look, you've got some great things happening. Look, I'm not going to be the person to tell you what your USPs are. You've got to decide where you're going to do it, but pick one and stick to it is a really good thing to undertake. Look, I also see, as Stuart targeted, and I didn't know that fact about how the Penrith City was the same distance from Martin Place as Sydney Airport, but be a very good service town. If you are a service town, be the town to be doing all those services. And if you have an airport that's going to require staff to have uniforms dry cleaned, there is such a broad breadth of things that can happen. Be that really good service town. It's the hub and spoke. You talk about if people go up to the Blue Mountains, why can't they come back and stay in Penrith? Because you've got the nighttime economy, you've got the restaurants, you've got the shops, you've got the retail therapy. Understand that sometimes, Wet and Wild or Raging Waters, I think it's called now, it used to be Wet and Wild, and the Sydney Zoo. You could be the town where people come and stay and go out to these attractions. As Stuart's always said, collaborate with your neighbours, because visitors never see borders. And look at those things and never really think that, the visitor understands which town they're driving through. Be the best town you can be. Beautification. We talk about this all the time. If you are a service town, be a beautiful service town where people actually use the digital platforms to tell people, this is my experience when I got there. You don't want the other alternative of this is my experience, don't go there. That's where you've got to break, because you've got some great things coming. The enablers, Stuart's done a great job in getting all this money to put the enablers in. Many places around New South Wales would love all these enablers coming. The bookend idea of, time to dust off the Western Sydney Destination Management Plan. If you read through some of those key things there, they're still active now. Dust it off, build it into that 5-year strategy, bookended under the Western Sydney Airport. I might leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll try and come back in for any other questions after this meeting, because I know you're going for a little bit longer. Okay.
Thank you very much, Greg. Good luck. All right, that's interesting. And we can ask others as Greg parts. Where does Business New South Wales sit in what's the, we've got all these different organisations.
That was my question to him. I was dying to ask him that. How does he fit in? Yes. How can we work with them?
Yeah. What do people see their role as in terms of business, supporting business? And
so, Richard, I just might make I'll try and trigger this conversation off a little bit. But Greg who works for Business New South Wales, which is effectively the kind of parent of all the chambers, right? So they've done a lot of work in identifying what works in tourism around the state. And I think what you want to be able to do is use the local chamber to draw down from Business New South Wales around their experience, around what's worked in other locations, and how can you nuance that for Penrith. He mentioned there the Destination Management Plan. I wonder how many people across the chamber have looked at the Destination Management Plan in the last 3 to 6 months. I think most businesses, in my experience, have literally been trying to keep their nostril above the waterline. But the phrase "dust off the Destination Management Plan" is a good one. It's already an existing piece of work that you can look at. What does the Penrith Destination Management Plan actually look like, and is it as valid now as what it was when it was first drafted? What needs to change? And in many respects, that DMP, to use the kind of vernacular, is the foundation or the first step of creating, the 5-year strategy. Like, what do you want to do over 5 years from a destination management perspective? What are your key attractions? What's your points of difference? Greg has heard me say 1,000 times, and he just referenced it then, don't get hung up on borders, don't get hung up on just being Penrith Council. People don't, get their passport stamped when they drive over or drive under the rail line at Lapston and go from Penrith to the Blue Mountains. They just drive from Penrith to the Blue Mountains. You can go to Glenbrook for a coffee in the morning and be on the water at Penrith Lakes in the afternoon. So how do you create those experiences? And then from the infrastructure perspective, which Greg was starting to touch on, state government's done some big enablers, but what are the things you need to do that allow for that next round of, or the next tier of private sector investment to come in? I think the connection between the chamber and Business New South Wales is allowing the chamber to draw down on Greg's expertise and Greg's experience in engaging other chambers and Business New South Wales on what's happened around the state. Don't leave that as an untapped resource.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Jenny, what's the city take on what we've heard so far, but also going forward in this 5-year plan?
Oh God, I was just pleased that I remembered to unmute myself there, Richard, for the first time ever. And just many thanks for the invitation to attend today and to be part of the discussion. It's great. From our perspective, Richard, I think, probably like all of you, our immediate is on recovery right now. We've been working with the chamber through the key business partner group and meeting weekly to talk about what's happening locally and with the 2 town centre associations to kind of find out what's happening on the ground and to understand the immediate and pressing issues, be able to feed that information through to others as appropriate, and to advocate where needed, and for us to respond where we can as well. So that kind of immediate recovery has been really happening since about July last year, unfortunately, because we've kind of dropped in and out of it from times. And I think the fact that we saw the recovery out of the first lockdown be so positive in many ways gives us hope that we will come out of this one perhaps a little slower, but with an equal kind of vigor, and see the local economy bounce on with that. Beyond this kind of immediate kind of crisis period, we are looking to leverage off some of the grant opportunities that are available right now. There's some opportunities through the Bushfire Recovery Program, and we're just applying for funding under that for a kind of two-tiered approach to destination management program for the local tourism industry to recover from the 2019-20 bushfires, which was a slump for the local sector, and then kind of barreling on from that, floods and pestilence has all of those kind of things have meant that the industry is still struggling, of course. So the 2-year plan for the recovery program through the grant application is for a operator development program with training and networking and familiarisation programs, product development, one-on-one business mentoring, support for businesses with strategies and growth and development. And then the second stage is a Penrith destination marketing program, taking completely on board everyone's comments around the fact that we don't exist as a bubble, but we exist within a region, and we have strong connectors to the other areas. We are not always necessarily a destination in itself, but we can be part of a destination kind of opportunity that people coming to the area or through the area, and we can kind of grab onto that as well. So looking at kind of increasing destination awareness, visitation, length of stay, spend, etc. through that program. Beyond that, as everyone's pointed out, we've kind of got that opportunity coming into the airport development, where we hope to really capture opportunities through doing a visitor economy strategy, and also by updating and refreshing our economic development strategy and implementation program, so that we can be strategy led but have enough flexibility within those to kind of respond to the opportunities that arise, because it's not going to necessarily just be the first plane coming in that creates the opportunity, but the activity and construction that happens in the meantime. The only other thing I'd say is that I think, like many of you, I'm also a strong believer in the activation and creation of activity within our city centres, but also in our suburb areas, to kind of create confidence and connection for residents. And I think, increasingly people visiting the area, they want to go to the places where the locals want to be. Like there's that sense of the genuine about Penrith and St Mary's and about the communities that is attractive to people. And the more we can build on that and kind of create that activity and energy from our local residents being, happy and out and being at good restaurants, and we're really starting to see that sort of sector take off as well, then I think there's great connections for this group in that.
Thank you, Jenny. I've got a question about one of the areas that Stuart tapped on. Is it, I guess, an opportunity, business and trade? So we don't really have a big convention program. We don't really have a big trade program. Is that something that council's looking at? So that's like, and are there other sort of untapped opportunities that we need to be, preparing for and developing?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I think that we've kind of acknowledged that start of the week area. And also the winter time is kind of our slump times locally in terms of visitations. And so, you know, through the events strategy program, we've kind of looked for those opportunities, but yes, business events, and being able to get into those trade shows. And also, I think for us to, again, to market more broadly for then the business sector to see the opportunities for what's offered locally.
Okay, and my last question is about the collaboration and the roles going forward. So council can't do everything for everybody, clearly. What's the best?
What do you mean?
Well,
sorry.
you do a good job. Thank you. No, yeah. What's your vision, and what's the council's vision of I suppose, how do we get the added value from collaboration and from work? So obviously state governments, clearly major funding partner and strategy partner in that, but business operators, this idea of a industry group, what's the council view on that?
I think the council views are very supportive of that. I mean, we'll get the best from leveraging off everybody. I mean, you know, from our point of view, we'd probably like to see the representation fairly broad within it. And so, you know, from a chamber perspective, it's you know, the Lights On program was going to be really great in terms of kind of elevating your profile and getting a broader representation in. But yeah, it's not, I mean, we don't see ourselves doing it all. It's the strength of industry groups really comes from that collaboration and from all partners taking a role in it, not just necessarily us. Yeah.
And who do you think owns, I don't know if own is the right word, but the Penrith brand? I mean, we've had lots of different, we've had the New West, we've had the Adventure Capital, we've had lots of different things. And, you know, sometimes, yeah, it's the council that's driven that. Is that the way forward, or is there something that we're all part of and that we all subscribe to, and that, you know, maybe is developed you know, collectively, and we go, yeah, that's it, new airport coming in, you know, this sense of recovery and opportunity. How do we get to that point where we go, yeah, we're really attached to that, like the locals attached to that, the business attaches to that? Is that something that's possible to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, those kind of operational responsibilities have just come into my portfolio. I've got to say, Richard, my kind of reflection on where things have been is that, yes, I think that we've perhaps driven things in isolation from times, and we would have done better if particularly for things like the Adventure Capital, if it would be more collaborative and come from a grassroots type approach. Council's just in the process of doing a brand refresh. So for Penrith City, you know, the P and the logo, you know, will stay pretty much, but a broadening of that in order to be able to have campaigns that sit within it. And this would kind of sit quite nicely within that process. So yeah, absolutely.
Richard, can I just offer a quick remark there? I think the whole community has got to own this. I wouldn't get sort of too hung up on a logo. What we need to do is sell experiences, and we need to be able to collaborate with each other about how you sell those experiences. So you got Destination Sydney Surrounds North here. They've got really great experience and engagement in other local government areas. You know, what can Penrith learn from the Hunter Valley, for instance, or what can Penrith learn from sort of fringe locations? The Central Coast, is there lessons that can be learned from those locations? So you've got the state governments, you've got particularly through its destination networks is probably that sort of closer to the ground. You've got Business New South Wales, plus you've got a local Chamber of Commerce, plus you've got a council, and you've got, you know, substantial landholders and individual businesses. It's not necessarily about trying to create a new fancy logo. Like, you're not going to run a campaign that outdoes a Core or Coke or, you know, whatever the above the line campaigning is going to be. It's about how do you start to position, particularly sort of in a bit of a below the line sense and a drive booking sense on what you can do in Penrith. So I would say you've got to try and break away from we need a logo, we need a brand. Penrith is a brand. Penrith already is a brand. It's a geographical location that you can look to leverage. And inside that is a series of values and experiences that you can share with the world. And if you're looking for a logo, don't travel any further than what council's already done. That pin drop P still works pretty well now as what it did, 5 or 10 years ago when it was first being formulated. How can you stretch off the back of that and sit in that sort of brand hierarchy? But everyone owns this. It's not just someone else's responsibility. You've all got to find ways to buy into it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And that's a good segue to you, Glenn, I think, for Destination Sydney Surrounds North in terms of that collaboration and the learnings from the other areas, Hunter, Newcastle, Wollongong, and there are others that you mentioned when we've discussed before. So what about your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And just acknowledging what the Minister just said then, I think the Destination Network does have a role to play, and certainly I think my homework from this will be a coordination role between the various parties, because I think, Jenny, acknowledging council's doing some fantastic work, but often we do that in isolation from the industry. And from a Destination Network perspective, for those that don't know the DNs well, we cover 13 local government areas. So to Stuart's earlier point, I think we can bring best practice to the table in terms of what some other regions are doing well. And there's been a lot of conversation today already just around the roles and responsibilities, which is the brief conversation we had, Richard and Stacey, previously around there's various models out there in a local government tourism context or a destination context. But one of the consistent challenges for all of us is understanding the roles and responsibilities for the various groups. And I think that's the facilitation role that the Destination Network can cover. Geographically, we cover Blue Mountains, Hawkesbury and Penrith, of course, and then we head down to Central Coast, Lake Macquarie, Newcastle, Port Stephens, and then pick up the Hunter Valley and broader Upper Hunter region. And within that region, there's various tourism structures. But the regions that do it very, very well, it's not necessarily based around what the structure is. The regions that do it very, very well, there's an absolute clarity around the roles and responsibilities. And we're talking right down to micro levels. We've talked about business events in this forum. So I think we would, as a Destination Network, would play a role with both the Chamber and Council and getting down to the micro detail as to whose roles and responsibilities are certain things. And it can go right down to whose responsibility is it to bring an industry group together to attend a trade show in Sydney. How's the region represented in that regard? Who owns the event strategy? Who's responsible for bringing events into the region? And the regions, and I'll use Port Stephens as an example, they've got a very clear structure as to what the association does. So the association's role in that instance is tourism marketing, and the council's role is very, very clearly in destination management, event attraction, infrastructure, visitor services and the like. So I guess that's the role we can bring to the table. And I think that's, I think if I was to be really positive of the Penrith, I think agreeing with many of the comments already made is there's an enormous amount of opportunity for this region to grow the visitor economy. We're talking about a huge amount of residential development in the region. There's going to be a lot of people coming to the region. The missing piece for me is very much around that clarity around roles and responsibilities. And I think that's what this group can flesh out the conversation in further detail and making sure we've got that. We've done this role, I think probably the Hunter Valley is our best example, where we've brought two councils together and the Tourism Association. And in that instance, we've now got a memorandum of understanding between the councils and the Tourism Association. And that MOU very, very clearly articulates who does what part of the tourism equation. And some examples within that MOU is the association, for example, is responsible for getting industry investment into marketing campaigns. We were very successful about 2 years ago, raising $300,000 out of the industry, getting that matched through Destination New South Wales for a $600,000 marketing campaign for the Hunter Valley. And that was an example where the industry body was very clear on their role. Their role was to get industry investment into the campaign, and council's role was to support that campaign financially as well. And that was a really good example of getting to the point of that MOU where council was very, very clear on their role, and the industry association was very, very clear on their role also. And I think that's the missing piece for me for Penrith, is that the industry doesn't have a great, strong voice from a tourism perspective at the table from a planning perspective. So if we are talking about destination management planning, who is the industry voice at the table providing industry input into that conversation? And then secondly, that clarity around the roles of the industry and or council and or the various other bodies. And acknowledging, I think for me, Penrith has huge opportunity of a raft of product that sits just outside of the local government area as well. You've got Australian Motorsport Park sitting just outside your boundaries. You've got a lot of product that's driving visitation into Penrith that doesn't necessarily sit within the local government area. So I think that's a real acknowledgement of the potential of the region. It's just this coordination piece that we need to get right. And from a destination network perspective, we're happy to commit resources to the establishment of that, for want of a better term, that conversation to bring the parties together to make sure we get those roles and responsibilities fleshed out and make sure we get them right. And in a perfect world, we have we can be one of the leading destinations that have it done well and clarity around those roles and responsibilities.
Thank you. I don't know if you heard that, but it sounds to me like he's put his hand up as a coordinating leader to help bring the pieces together. I think that's great. What about this idea of no borders? So the Blue Mountains being, the great example next door, and that sits within your network. What are the opportunities there for Penrith, particularly, to sort of benefit from that association? The two-way traffic. I mean, Stuart mentioned coffee in Glenbrook in the lower mountains, but what are the opportunities for synergy there?
Yeah, Richard, I think we need to be really honest in the conversation, and in some instances, Blue Mountains is going to be compared to Penrith. You are going to target the same market in some instances, and in other instances, you're going to be a fabulous partner. So I'll use the international longer term. I think it makes absolute sense to the consumer that Penrith is having a conversation with Blue Mountains regarding itineraries, international products and the like to capture that internet, and we can be quite good partners in that regard. But I think we need to be really honest, and in some instances you will be going after the same market as the Blue Mountains. So I think we just need to pick our opportunities where we can benefit each other and work together where it makes practical sense. And then in other instances, we will be competing for a share of the same market as Blue Mountains or the Central Coast or other regions. Yeah.
And the second question is around, again, the business and trade opportunity as visitor economy, as opposed, visitor economy, tourism, they go hand in hand. What are your thoughts around opportunity there?
In the business event space, or?
Yes.
Look, I think very simply, and noting Phil's on the call as well, is that, again, using benchmarks out of other regions, I think we need to understand whose role that is to pull that together. So if there's a business events trade show in Sydney, who coordinates that? And in a lot of instances, it will take industry to invest in that. If we need to pull $10,000 together to have representation at the meetings and events conference coming up, who drives that? Is that a combination of council investment and industry investment? And in a lot of instances, we can't put everything on council. And in a lot of instances, that may take your top 3 or 5 businesses that play in that business event space to contribute, get together. But there's an absolutely a coordination role that needs to occur for that to happen. And I think they're the types of roles that either a chamber or an association group can take on and provide that investment. Because when council sticks out the hand and asks for financial investment into a trade show, often industry is not a great supporter, but if the industry is asking for the support from industry, the results certainly far better, and that's been our experience with our destinations.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments around destination Sydney surrounds, or broadly destination New South Wales?
Richard, I've just got to jump off if you don't mind.
Okay, well, closing comment from. Thank you for your support. That's from us.
No, I look, I think we've covered there's a lot of ground that's been covered. I think you'll hear from a few more people, but I think don't think this plan, actually ink it, like write it down, set measurable targets like any good strategic plan would do. Glenn's given you some good examples around where the destination network has been able to clearly articulate who's responsible for what. Don't get too hung up on structure. Just be really clear about who's going to be accountable for their actions. Look to leverage the existing enablers that are in place, but identify the new ones and seek out those opportunities. But yeah, getting more organised and making sure people are accountable for what they do is going to be a big driving force around taking Penrith from what looks like a really obvious visitor economy opportunity to being a visitor economy success story.
Okay, thank you, Stuart.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
I just had a question for Glenn. Yeah, Glenn, when you were talking, obviously the North, straight away, I think of the Hunter Valley as a great success story of industry working together in partnership. Is that probably the standout across the northern regions? Is there one in particular that you think has done it incredibly well? Because I'm a big believer in let's not reinvent the wheel. As you've already pointed out, if there's somebody that's a complete standout, we'd love to probably moving forward connect with somebody in that area and pick their brain, so to speak. The ground running. Yeah. Is there a standout? Is it the Hunter or?
Look, they, speaking frankly, they were a basket case 3 or 4 years ago. They hadn't had a coordinated marketing. They hadn't had any coordinated marketing activity out of the Hunter Valley for well over a decade. Wow. And not just us, there are other people to play here. They recognised that, so they, from a problem, they identified a more clear approach to how they manage the visitor economy in broadest terms. There's sort of 3 different types of structures. One's the fully internal structure where council drives the visitor economy, so they do tourism marketing, attract major events, drive most of that activity we'd consider in that space. There's the fully external model, like Port Stephens, where council funds an external tourism body to run parts or all of the visitor economy piece. And then there's a hybrid model that sits often between that, where it's a bit of both. That's probably the most common model. And some councils actually have outsourced tourism as well. So there's a few different models. But Kate, I'd bring it back to, I just think we have to be really clear on roles and responsibilities. I don't actually have a preference to a model. That's just me speaking really frankly and honestly, because those models, the success of those models all depend on the people and the clarity as to who's doing what. So I use Port Stephens example. They've got a really clear line and they know and I'll use a practical example. So if through to Neil's office, so through Destination New South Wales, we get a contact for a fabulous piece of media opportunity, that there's a media outlet in Sydney that wants to do some filming tomorrow. I know my easiest phone call to make is Port Stephens, because I know exactly who I need to call. I know that person will contact industry directly, and I know that we'll have a media for Mill organised within 2 hours. So I'd have the same challenge for Penrith. Who do we make that phone call to? And certainly all destinations are like this. I just think it's a real clarity of roles. It's not about structure. And I also think that we need to be really clear not to develop another structure that has some administrative costs and some administrative burden just to try and probably take away from the roles that we should be doing collectively as a group. And we own part of that problem as well. So we'll put some resources in to bring the groups together. But yeah, I don't think it's a structural conversation. I think it's a roles and responsibilities conversation.
Great.
And I was just going to ask, following on from that, in the Port Stephens model, for example, does it involve regular meetings, or is it more about setting up the structure and then everyone knows what's happening from there, or do they still meet regularly and share ideas and collaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, there's a couple of things. There's meetings at an industry level. So how do we get, you know, your best restaurant to have a conversation with Phil's group and have a conversation with the paddle steamer and those things, so that we can come together as an industry. So there's that role of bringing people together. We need to understand whose role that is. And then there's also the more strategic conversation. How do we provide Jenny, and acknowledging Jenny's team at council from the tourism team? I think they're a fantastic group. But the challenge for me is there's a bit of a disconnect between industry and often the tourism team in most regions. How do we ensure that the industry's voice is at the table through the planning process? And council wants that in broadest terms. They need that industry input. How do we do it effectively, and how do we make sure that it's professional, the right information, and industry providing up the information that's often at industry's hands? Someone like Phil can give you data on visitation, and that's the important part of the conversation along the way. So yeah, I think it's about that connection.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. And now let's move to the future, Jackie, and Penrith Lakes, and paint your vision. What can we look forward to? As much as you can tell us. I know that there's been a little bit of unveiling with you know, the film studios, the golf course, the helicopters, and there's this sort of hidden promise of things to come. But yeah, in general sense, this is potentially a game changer for the region, and potentially by the time that airport is opening up.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And that's exactly right. So as we heard from, you know, Minister Ayres in relation to his sort of 5-year strategic plan, that is exactly the process that, you know, since coming into my role as Chief Executive at the Lakes, I did. You've seen many a master plan over time, so I'm particularly shy about, you know, going live with sort of what's coming, because I'm dotting I's and crossing T's and making sure whatever I come out with will absolutely be delivered, because I think the community's been led down a few garden paths, and we need to make sure, particularly in this kind of, you know, really important time, you know, which has been said a few times, but post-COVID, massive enabling infrastructure coming out, that whatever Penrith Lakes comes out with, it will be delivered, and it will be delivered to coincide with these timeframes. So look, what we're trying to do at the Lakes now is really create a site which will have a sustainable mixed-use development. That can be activated now, and that means residential off the table. So what we have to do is focus on, well, what can be achieved? What's the enabling infrastructure that's really going to boost our site by way of activation, and making use of that. So everybody knows the composition of our site with, you know, with the Nepean River, with the abundance of, you know, lake beaches against the backdrop of the mountains, is unmistakably striking and memorable. And and my job is to captivate this and to make sure that the Western Parkland City places greater and massive importance on such an iconic destination, because this asset, to be frank, is Penrith's point of difference. It will have an actual waterfront that can be activated, unlike what we've seen in the West in the past. You will literally have, hopefully, you know, a waterfront dining precinct where you take 10 steps down and guess what, there's water. So, you know, I need to, in this plan that we're coming up with, make sure that I present residents with an opportunity to come into the site. And that's improving their lifestyle through access to open air recreational activities, whether it be the final stretch of the Great River Walk, whether it be picnicking by the Wildlife Lake, which is sort of an environmental lake, whether it be accessing on those blistering hot summer days, the lake beaches, you know, to cool themselves instead of relying on air conditioning. That's exactly what we want to do and provide for the community and for the residents of Western Sydney. Couple that though with the opening of the Nancy Bird Walton Airport in 2026, which creates a unique opportunity to showcase these beautiful assets to the global community. So for far too long, we've had visitors to this state come and frequent those iconic places in the east. The Nancy Bird Walton Airport is an absolute game changer, because it means if we can get those visitors off that plane, they can come to Penrith, stay in Penrith, play in Penrith, and visit all the tourist attractions out here before heading east. That tourism economy and what we can generate literally from that is something that Western Sydney has not fully appreciated before. So look, as you flagged, Richard, you know, sort of Penrith Lakes is home to the Whitewater Rafting Stadium, the International Regatta Centre, other parts currently undergoing change are the proposed film studios recently announced, the helicopter pad and the PM Business Park. The focus I now have is for the eastern side of the lakes, and that's our main development area of about 330 hectares. The first bite-sized chunk I'm going to be taking out of that is 80 hectares, and that 80 hectares, just for scale purposes, only represents 3.2% of our site. So that, you know, development is a blip on a page in terms of our site. But what we are trying to do, and this part is yet to be released, but is rezone this to be the waterfront destination of Penrith and Greater Sydney. And that's for a few reasons. Like I said, it's the urban resilience piece of the rising temperatures, absolutely mandating that we need the community in sooner rather than later. On top of that, we're hoping to provide a pivotal business, entertainment and leisure precinct. We are hoping to provide, you know, commercial lands, resorts, food and beverage outlets literally on the water, leisure activities and things akin to, you know, some things that you have in the east, like a farmer's market, grounds of Alexandria type style, something, a paddock to plate concept. You know, maybe you grow the food in the north, which frequents the restaurants in the south. You know, a real, you know, I would hope, and this is probably in a few years to come, but a real nice resort, which captivates that sort of 5-star plus market, which I don't think we have in Penrith at present. We also are trying to achieve new leisure activities, and that's everything from the cycling and walking tracks and the quiet spaces for respite, but also you know, driving ranges, which are new look driving ranges. We would love to land an artificial wave park, which coincide, or some crystal lagoons, which coincide with our man-made lakes. There's a hell of a lot that we can do. But if we hit every sort of priority of government, that's the grey development that I've been talking about. Clearly, we have the open space by way of green grid as well. And so the part which, you know, is a question mark is the blue grid, but we also have plans to conquer that from the inception of this development, which is engage on a project which I'm sort of trying to bring together now, which is a PV float, PV ground from a solar point of view, coupling with a battery, which would take our development for this phase 1 sort of 80 hectare site off grid, literally from day one. Which in my view, if we hit all those nodes, is an absolute game changer. And the development, you know, clearly would enable significant private investment into Western Sydney, the creation of thousands of jobs for local residents and, you know, sort of further abroad as well. But importantly, open up, you know, timing wise, if we can, and I'm pushing for this, but if we can get to the point where our site is open for the opening of that Nancy Bird Walton Airport, that's just critical, absolutely critical. And I'm pushing as hard as we can to try and make that timeframe work. And I do have the support of Minister Ayres, which is fantastic. And I do have the support of Council as well, which is fantastic. And so this is a space that we haven't been in before. So look, I fundamentally believe that Penrith Lakes and surrounds can be the playground of the West. I believe it can be a public destination for all, and I believe it needs to be locally loved but globally recognised. And that's us. I think you're on mute, Richard.
Sorry, locally loved and globally recognised. I like that. And no, thank you, Jackie. And yeah, full support. You know, I'm a fan, and we're neighbours. That fence with the
has to come down.
I'm all about bringing those fences down.
Yeah.
So I guess government's critical in helping bring that to fruition, the planning. So you mentioned Minister Ayres, you mentioned Council, but Minister Stokes perhaps as well. Yeah, all of that has to come into play. What are the thoughts around that, you know, Glenn and Jenny or others, just in terms of, I suppose, you know, being a major part of any 5-year strategy for the airport activation? And
I should probably say we're hoping to be complementary to what's already existing and to be developed. We certainly don't want to be competing. It's about how we make Penrith Lakes help Penrith stand out from the crowd, more so than this is Penrith Lakes, this is Penrith, who's going to get, you know, who's going to win. And I probably should have said that from the beginning. Sorry, Jenny, to interrupt.
I've got a question with Jackie. When's this all going to start? Is there any timeframes when we're going to see Earth moving and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I have very ambitious timeframes, and my very ambitious timeframes would hopefully see, you know, a SEP amendment, you know, around mid-year next year, which would then enable a decision by the end of next year, which would then enable DAs to be lodged, and you start bringing in lead-in services in 23 for DA terms to start being in 24, which then gives you a couple of years before the Nancy Bird Walton Airport opens. Now that's ambitious. And that's me pushing and pulling and driving as hard as I possibly can. Will there be slippage? I don't know, but that's the ambitious timeframe that we're setting ourselves to make sure that we are ready when that first plane arrives. I mean, I think it was Minister Ayres who just said from recovery to liftoff. That's pretty much how I'm trying to play our strategic game.
Thank you.
Jenny, you were you're on mute too.
Yes, I am. And, you know, all you probably heard me saying was going, ugh. You know, hearing Jacqueline's kind of the bigger picture vision, you know, like, yes, I think there's always been an acknowledgement of the important role that Penrith Lakes potentially provides into the future for our residents. Urban heat island, cooling the city, been important priorities for us. Getting access to water for residents is great. Beyond, at the kind of low or the, you know, more detailed level around the planning, I can't comment at this point in time. Jacqueline's indicated support from council and from Minister Ayres, which is great. We, you know, again, you know, we're wanting to work in partnership as we go forward on the lakes and to see the opportunities. You know, we're also aware that there's pushback and commentary from residents and from others, and again from other, you know, other LGAs around us to some of the proposals as well. And so all of those things kind of get taken into consideration. I don't believe council's the consent authority on it anyway. It'll be a state, state-driven process. So,
yeah. But we do in the planning process have, and this is what's sort of super important, council's at the table in that planning process, which is fantastic, because you are obviously, you know, the biggest stakeholder in relation to this sort of plan. And yeah, I mean, look, I am not naive enough to say everyone's going to buy into my enthusiasm and vision and this is just going to be a massive success, right? We will have those haters and we will have those people, you know, who we've heard already who thinks the whole thing of Penrith Lake should be a massive expanse of grass and a huge national park. You know, there will be open space like Western Sydney has not seen before on our site. The reality of leaving it as purely grass in a national park is that also requires funding, and that's very hard to do without some activation in relation to that. So yeah, look, I'm bound to get everything, you know, from woe to go on this in terms of what the ultimate plan is going to be. I would like to think that, you know, we can stand confidently and say, as between everyone who is doing the planning, that we are trying to improve the lifestyle of the surrounding community and we are trying to elevate the West, you know, to tap into this sort of visitor economy, which we should get through the opening of the Nancy Bird Walton Airport. They are very much the two big strategic drivers which are driving the activation of this initial phase 1 concept. And, you know, I'm just hoping and praying that people come on board with me.
No, good on you. Yep.
Excellent.
Jacqueline, I'm certainly as excited as you are, because I think from a tourism perspective, and this is just using other areas, the visitor economy growth is often led by product. And like being really frank, Penrith has and I'm careful when I say this, Penrith has a shortage of product. So we've looked at Penrith right now from an international perspective. And if an international audience wanted to buy product in Penrith, it's a very, very small pot at the moment. So that development, if it's led by product and there's more things to see and do, and most importantly, from a commercial sense, if there's product that the consumer can buy, you'll be able to capture people flying in through that airport. And I think to Minister Ayres' point earlier, if we talk about the phases, let's say this is longer term, the development of an international strategy, for want of a better term, we need to understand what our role is to play in that. And product development is absolutely key, because Penrith doesn't have a lot to sell right at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely, couldn't agree more.
I might just jump into that and just add to what Glenn was saying. I guess there's, even though we've got that 5-year or potentially a 5-year strategy that we can map out, I think there's some low-hanging fruit that for some of the products and the as Glenn was saying, you know, there's not many that have been working in that international space, but from a domestic point of view, organically, there's a lot of collaboration between the businesses within Penrith already, without an association or without council. They're organically doing it amongst each other. So, you know, they're already creating that advocacy for the region as well. So, you know, as I said, there's that low-hanging fruit we can tap into and start making some of these businesses visible online now, bookable online now, so that they're more mature come 4 years' time. And when when international borders are fully fledged, opening up in 12 months' time, that's another tick in their box as well. So, you know, and I can work with the DN and the Chamber and Council to tap into some of that low-hanging fruit and establish, you know, how we can start working with some of these businesses as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanil. And that's a good link through to, I wouldn't call you low-hanging fruit, Phil, but yeah, local business doing it tough, occupancy down, pandemic's hitting hard. Let's bring it back to the reality, I guess, now in terms of recovery, but also what your sense of opportunity is when you hear all of this. Because you're relatively new, you moved into Penrith and then COVID hit.
Yeah, thanks, Foxy. Yeah. Well, yeah, as you know, the accommodation industry has been smashed over the last sort of 18 months. Particularly hard this last lockdown because you're unable to travel outside your LGA. So we've basically been taking no bookings unless they're essential workers, although our occupancy has been around 40% compared to other hotels is around 10 to 15. So because we have the longer stay market and a lot of industry and workers around that. Just to contradict Stuart, our busiest nights are traditionally in a normal circumstance is Monday to Thursday because we focus on the business market. 80% of our business comes from the corporate world, and our weeknights are Friday, Saturday night. We don't have the attractions like Mercure have. They've got Panthers there, and at the Novotel down at Rudy Hill with the RSL, and then you got St Mary's Rugby League Club there as well. So they're attractions for people to come in for the weekend. We don't have that right next to us. We've got some nice restaurants and stuff, but we're a bit weak on weekends. A lot of the major projects that have been going on through the pandemic, the Northern Road, the Castlereagh Railway Overpass, which is finished now, but we got a lot of work out of that while that was being done. Bit of work coming out of the airport, and that should ramp up next year when the runways start to be laid. The railway line as well, that's going to be a massive thing out of St Mary's out to the airport site. We expect that there's going to be a lot of engineers and special people that skills that will come from interstate and probably overseas as well. and you know, coming from overseas, they're not going to be staying 1 or 2 nights. They'll be staying for, you know, some weeks at a time. So that's the sort of market we're after, and we're in contact with a lot of suppliers and contractors around those major projects. We talk about, you know, Penrith Lakes is a fantastic development coming, you know, and talk about what other products is the winter sports world as well. I think that'd be a game changer as well for Penrith. If that could get up and running with the Lakes development, we've got some quality products there for people to come and stay, not just overnight, but for a number of nights. And when we talk about people coming to Penrith, they're not just staying and spending money in accommodation. They're going to restaurants, they're going to coffee shops, they're going over to Westfield, they're spending money in Woolies and Aldi and the fish market and the grocery and all that sort of stuff. And that's all employing local people. And they're ordering Uber Eats, they're jumping in Ubers and travelling around and stuff. So they're spending money in the area. So it is important that we drive money from outside the area. With the opening with Stuart talking about on the 11th of October, it's not going to affect us too much because you won't be able to travel outside of Sydney, and people in the regions can't travel into Penrith. So you don't get many people coming from Bondi or Manly or Cronulla and staying out here for recreation. So when the 80% vaccination rate hits, that's when the regions open up and we can expect some people to come to Penrith. Now, what we've found is that we don't have the product, we don't have people coming in holidays, but we do have family and friends coming back to Penrith to visit. And a lot of those come from the Central Coast, Newcastle and the South Coast. We get a lot of people coming from areas like Mudgee, Orange, Bathurst, coming down to Penrith for various reasons. Around Christmas, they come down to shop, they come down to visit people at the hospital, they come for medical appointments and things like that. And then from the 1st of December, you know, it's all open, but the borders aren't open, the interstate borders. Victorian border might be open. I heard Gladys the other night talking about maybe that's the first one we open up. They're in the same boat as us, but I can't see the Premier of Queensland opening up her border before Christmas. We get a number of travellers coming down from Queensland and also from Victoria. Until those borders are open, we won't see those travellers. And even when the borders are open, we found this back in February, people are hesitant to book because they're still nervous about the border being closed. They might arrive in Sydney and then within 2 hours, the border's closed and they can't get back and they've got to spend 2 weeks in holiday in a hotel and all that sort of stuff. So until they're confident that the borders are going to stay open, well, we'll see a trickle coming through. But our corporate market traditionally travels October, November, very busy months. February, March, April, very busy months. And winter's weak for us, as Jenny said. So trying to attract events to our area, like we have a big netball tournament here every June over at Jamison Park, which has been cancelled the last 2 years. Hopefully we can get that back. There's a new athletics track going in. Hopefully we can attract some athletic events to that. There's a new hockey field open in the university. All these things, they're quality facilities we should be trying to tap into and speaking to, you know, New South Wales hockey or netball and ask them, is there any other tournaments around? Can we attract and show them Penrith and show them what it's worth out here and the accommodation and try and attract events to us and be proactive about that and aggressive and go to these organisations and put a proposal to them and say, right, we want your event out here. And so, concerts and shows and things like that. I know that the long lunch, you know, it's stalled a bit because of the pandemic. That's a fantastic event that can grow and attract people from outside the area. So we need events that attract outside the areas. But, you know, long term, if pandemic doesn't come back, you know, there's some huge opportunities there for the Penrith area, and that's one of the main reasons I invested here in Penrith, come here with the airport and the western suburbs is growing. You know, it's moving out at us. You know, the whole city's coming towards Penrith. It's past Parramatta, and I can see in a number of years' time that there's going to be some high-rise buildings in Penrith, and with the airport, you know, we're going to provide facilities into the airport and things like that. So it's all positive moving forward. It has been negative the last few months, but I've always look at the glass half full, Foxy. So And also with the regatta centre, it's natural that we get events there as well. We get a lot of rowing and paddling, and that's high season comes January, February, March, April, and we get a lot of rowers from all around the country and overseas. And we love that. And we've got the World Cup coming up in a few years, thanks to you, Foxy. So we're looking forward to that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. And just on sport, because it's close to my heart, I guess, we saw a lot of cancellations, rowing, dragon boating, canoeing, triathlon, all of that. And, predominantly people traveling in from interstate. So I think, we can take this all offline, but the sort of recovery strategy for sport is important too, to sort of build that confidence and lead up events. And I think, Phil, I'm sure you'd endorse this, the coordination around that and the events calendar. And what we're hearing there is there's a gap in winter. So which sports can we really pull in during winter, or which business trade events can we really pull in winter? So I'm mindful of time now. We're sort of running towards the end. Perhaps people haven't heard from today. Ellen from Deep Hill Media, up the mountains. Do you have a perspective on things that you've heard in the discussion, and I guess steps going forward?
Yeah, so from what I've heard this morning, there seems to be lots of opportunity, especially for the chamber, to be taking responsibility and maybe a role with, trade and business events, conferencing, and working with council and business to attract new businesses to the area, which would support what council's doing and help alleviate their workload, but also give a different perspective on those negotiations and that pitching to big business. That they're my main takeaways from what I've heard so far.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I'll just carry on from what Glenn and Tanil have both spoken about today. We're happy to commit resources to the chamber and the committee and getting a group together. So as we've spoken about in the past, hunt as a pack and start working towards the same direction.
Okay, thank you. Stacey, from our chamber perspective.
Well, I actually have a question because I know we've sort of tapped into the idea that Penrith is on the verge of having all these really great products, but at the moment, the focus, and I know, Glenn, we spoke about this last week, should the current focus, after we figure out roles and such, be on that VFR kind of campaigning, so visiting friends and relatives? Is that kind of how we should be positioning ourselves in the short term?
Stacey, I think there's probably a challenge back to this group as a whole is to develop the priorities. And to Stacey's point, I mentioned visiting friends and relatives, and to Jacqueline's development on the lakes. There's an enormous amount of residential growth in the region as a whole. But I think we as a group, and maybe challenging the chamber here, is that what is the next conversation, noting the time, is do we say to the chamber right now, you pull together, and for want of a better term, an advisory group, 4, 5 or 6 people from the chamber that have a tourism interest. Jenny challenged to council is to have 1 or 2 people at that same table to have council represented. We're happy to coordinate it, but my challenge to all of us would be, what are those top priorities? What are the short-term priorities? What are the medium-term and long-term priorities right now? And then we can start to flesh out who does what. Because I think, Phil, to your comment, I loved your analogy of the netball event, but my challenge to this group would be, who's responsible for picking up the phone right now to New South Wales Netball Group and telling them that we want the 2022 under 15 netball championship for the next 10 years. So there's that type of conversation, I think, that has to be fleshed out, and we can bring the examples to the table. There's some regional towns in Australia that do a fantastic job just in events. But I think what Penrith has to do is we have to get the role and responsibility for events. We also need to talk to business events. We need to talk to the visiting friends and relative market. But out of all of that, pick our top couple of priorities as to what we're going to do right now and get some rubber on the road and deliver some direct outcomes. I think that's the big challenge to this group.
So developing a working group, I guess it's whose hand is up. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll do that. I think that's the sense is that we would pull together an advisory group. We would then, the engine room of that, Destination Sydney surrounds would provide some resource for the coordination and so on, and council would be integral to that. So whereas we'd sort of formed a tourism committee that hasn't really functioned, I mean, we've had initiatives, we've put forward ideas, we've organised this, so to speak, but we haven't really connected those other pieces. So I think as if we move quickly to that sort of outcome type thing, that's something that we should do if that's what people agree with. We set something up so that we then can project forward. Okay, we need a 5-year plan, but we need some low-hanging fruit. We need some short-term goals, and critically, those roles and responsibilities. I like what Tanil was saying earlier about let's get things humming locally, and I'm sure that will be music to Phil's ears too. So coordinated event strategy and so on. So I think we can do that, but we can't do it all. We can create the connection between our members and attract new members, and take an initiative, because I think, is that what you were suggesting, Glenn? The initiative to set up an advisory would come perhaps from the chamber?
Yeah, and again, Richard, not focused on the structure per se, but actually just getting that roles and responsibilities fleshed out. Like I agree that one group can't do everything.
Yeah.
And I think we just really need to avoid tripping over each other. If council's doing it already, let council do it. And I think we need to understand that council's doing it with an agreed outcome. And then we need to pick up the gaps and work out who fills in those gaps. And to Neil's points, there's also a lot of things already in place. So New South Wales First offers internationally ready training for the industry. So we can tell you what's available. We can work with Tanil to look at running those programs in specifically Penrith with a very clear goal of trying to get, pick a number, an additional 15 or 20 internationally ready products in the next 3 years. So we can set some priorities in place pretty quickly. And that's probably the low-lying fruit we can get quickly. Sorry, Tanil.
No, that's right. And I was just going to add to that, even in regards to business events, obviously there's a huge opportunity there for, especially as we see a lot of the new accommodation that's coming on board. But we're already doing it. We're already working really closely with council and, the tourism marketing team on getting some of those corporate business events wins. So it'll just be, fleshing out some of those conversations that we're already having with council and bringing it out into that broader base on how we can, channel some of those leads into other areas. So as Glenn said, there's lots of initiatives that the organisation is already doing that many of the businesses can tap into. And whether it's, I'm doing some closed group presentations on some of our programs and initiatives to help some of these businesses guide them through that process, that's more than, I'm more than happy to do that.
Excellent.
But as I said, they're those quick wins that we can tick off straight away.
Yeah. Liz.
Yeah, I think what would be good is to just very briefly set some timeframes around this. I think originally we had planned this lunch for key stakeholders in the industry, and then we were planning to move to a broader sort of event, which was more like almost like a bit of a trade show for the tourism industry. And I think perhaps now with this direction, for us to form this advisory group fairly quickly, get together and actually start to put down on paper what the plan is. And I think one of the key things, and this is where this all started with the chamber getting involved in an event, is communicating it to the industry. And I think that's one of the biggest issues. And the success of our Lights on Penrith event at the beginning of the year was all about letting people know what was actually going on. And that was for the broader Penrith and looking at all the different elements of that. But I think to my mind, if we can form this group, get some traction, and then actually go to the market and tell them what we're doing and give them that enthusiasm and understanding that it's not just talk, there is some action happening, and these are the sorts of things that they might see from that.
Thank you, Liz.
I just need to quickly jump off, guys. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all, and hopefully I'll continue this discussion in the weeks to come.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you, Jackie.
Richard, sorry, if I could just have, and apologies for interrupting. I'm just, and I mean, I might be a really nerdy bureaucrat at heart, but I really do like the idea of some understanding and agreement, like whether that's through an MOU. And Glenn keeps saying, let's not make it around structure, but to some extent, we do kind of need to understand our roles and our strengths and where we play to that. And I feel like if we can spend a little bit of time going forward, nutting through some of that, probably with Glenn, then we will save ourselves some heartache, in the future, because we'll be really clear about what we're all doing, and we'll be kind of then, be able to be responsible for our various elements, and also understanding where we collaborate and where we might diverge on things as well. So.
Yeah, I have to agree with Jenny. I'm a little bit about structure and goals. I hearing from Glenn, it seems like Glenn's thrown it to us to say what are our short and long-term goals, and then perhaps arrange another meeting, talk about what we want to see over the next 1, 3 and 5 years, and then look at what MOU we need to get to those goals. Is that kind of what you're saying, Glenn? And then work out whose role it is moving forward to achieve those goals. So you do the MOU based on where we want to be over the next 5 years.
Yeah, look, it is, Kate. And there's, I guess for us, just from my experience, there's a step prior to that, which sounds very, very simple. And we're happy we've done this with a few other regions, is just that who does what. So, and using Phil's example and other things, we've got a list of about 30 odd pieces of the visitor economy. So who's responsible for business events in general, the consumer facing website, industry development, industry coordination. So it's a whole list of things. And the very first role in Blue Mountains is getting close to an MOU with council as well at the moment with the association because of their funding. And that was the very first step that we all took. So I'm happy to facilitate that session with Jenny, a couple of council staff and a couple of industry reps. And it will be a very, very, crude's not the right word, but it's be a very simple looking process of who owns the consumer facing website and all of these things, who's going to represent the region at business events. So yeah, we can facilitate that session as a starting point. And I think from that would then flesh out some gaps. It'll flesh out some overlaps, and then that can then lead into the next conversation around, do we need to take it to an MOU? And I'm not dismissive of a structure. I'm probably just more around, we don't need to create another structure. There might be something that can be adopted within the existing chamber structure, which is often, and Greg might be able to comment on that, which is quite normal around the state, that a lot of chambers do have a tourism function within the business chamber. So just not creating another structure for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just another
function.
Sorry, Jenny.
No, sorry.
No, it's just another platform of what business does as a chamber. It's just another layer, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's the visitor economy. And I would sort of see, Glenn, that maybe the word visitor economy is used. Richard, I know you use tourism, but if we are to start to look at the visitor economy, you'll actually start to apply for your work where your members sit. It's the deep supply chain. It's the milkman. If you get more coffee being made, he has to deliver more milk. Is he in tourism? He probably doesn't think he is, but he's part of that deep supply chain of goods and services. If you get another business that is, and maybe Phil uses an external accountant locally, does that accountant think he's in tourism? No, but he's in the visitor economy. So start to build up that deep supply chain of goods and services makes your chamber stronger. And we're talking about how the chamber becomes stronger. But, I go back, when I pop back in, the chamber plays a really good opportunity to be a knowledge sharer. Glenn talked about it, but, if the netball is coming, who's going to tell all the businesses in there that the netball's coming? Don't assume they all read read the newspaper on EDM, someone's got to be out there as the keeper of knowledge and the sharer of knowledge. You become a provider of knowledge. And I have to tell you, that's where your power will be. Because if I said to someone here, Phil's just talked about, and not to be anything other than listening, the minister talked about accommodation stats, and Phil was totally different to the ministers. So data is really important, and evidence-based data, if you're talking to council and local government, evidence-based data is your strength, and knowing those things and sharing it. If you have, or through Glenn or Tennille, if they have data that they can share with you, all of a sudden you become very powerful because you've got a lot of evidence-based knowledge. Understanding that the airport's going to open up, we all sort of get those bigger ones, but some of these littler ones. And to take where Jenny and the local government plays an important role, don't expect because you ring up and ask for an event to happen, you've got to go through DAs unless the council is proactive and has DA application. They have the application to DA across sites, which is common around the state, where if you have the river frontage that's owned by council land or crown land, managed by council, is there a DA to hold that event? Because when the event organizer wants to come through, he wants to make it easy. He doesn't need to go through traffic, rubbish removal, emergency evacuation procedures, all those things that council can actually have a DA themselves over an event space. I'm only just giving you some examples. Glenn asked me what's happening around this. There's lots of things that you can learn from. Don't think you're flying solo in here. A lot of it's been done before. Start to look around and see it. I was engaged in my previous role with the corridor from the south coast to the Western Sydney airport. The south coast, if that airport's going to be used for freight, we were using it to lift oysters out of the south coast through that airport into Asia markets. So you can actually use collaborative corridors of things to go forward rather than just be solo. Anyway, look, happy to, I talk to Glenn a fair bit because he's one of the 6 networks where I've got to look after the whole state. Happy to feed stuff back in through to Glenn, and where required, pop my head in. Because I think, I always look at, and sorry to rabble on, but I always look at the M7. If you look at the M7, what it did, someone built the enabler, the commercial world came in and tacked onto the side of it. If you didn't have the M7, that piece of infrastructure, you probably wouldn't have all the Aldi, Woolworths, logistics, all those things sitting around there. You guys are going to have a really big piece of infrastructure that you don't have to control, you don't have to do it, but what you can be is the sucker on the big boat. You can be the sucker fish on all the boat and take all the glory without having to do the big investment. And if you think a little bit like that, all of a sudden you go, I know where I sit and where I can play and where I can be active.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Well, I'm sure we've all got things to go on to now, and we've run a little bit over. I'd like to thank everyone for participating and contributing. I think it's been very rich and with some great optimism, ideas, but also really good IP and experience that's come to light. I think really what we need to do is we kind of retreat into our little group, and we'll reflect back with some highlights and notes, and then probably just informally just test some of the, I guess, the key actions, which would be, let's set up quickly another meeting to just hash out the high level roles and responsibilities. Let's agree that an advisory group is a good thing going forward, and that the collaboration is important. And then I think if we set some timelines, to me, it would be, let's take off this lunch off the table, so to speak, and push it back. But let's aim for about 6 months down the track to go, this is what the 5 years looks like. And then test that, back out into because I think we need to instill confidence in the community. We need to instill confidence within business and the locals that, things are coming on. So the lake's coming on, the recovery's come through. We're going to attract sporting events. We've got a business event strategy and so on. That's going to take a bit of time. So my view would be that we don't pursue the event that we had in mind in the short term. We push that back, but that we work quickly and put ink to the plan, as Stuart said, and that we work closely with, what we've got here is, Business New South Wales, Destination Sydney Surrounds, Penrith Council, and then the Chamber finding its role clearly within all of that to connect to business. So yeah, we'll provide some event highlights from it. I think we'll share the recording because there's a lot of such good content, certainly from our side, that we need to draw on. But look, thank you, everybody. Kate, do you want to close off, President?